The grand courtroom of New York City was packed, buzzing with an unusual energy. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered, and spectators leaned forward, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. The case was a high-profile one. Donald Trump, the former and now present president of the United States, was entangled in a legal battle over an alleged financial scandal. But today, all eyes weren't just on Trump. Instead, they shifted toward his youngest son, Barron Trump, who had unexpectedly accompanied his father to court. The 18-year-old had always stayed out of the limelight, a reserved figure in the chaotic world of politics. Yet, his presence here hinted at something unusual. Judge Malcolm Reinhardt, an old, sharp-tongued veteran of the legal system, peered over his glasses at the young man standing beside his father. With a smirk, he let out a short chuckle. "And what brings the young Trump here today? A take-your-kid-to-court day." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even some of Trump's own lawyers smirked. Barron, however, remained unfazed. Unlike the arrogance people often associated with his family name, he stood tall, his expression unreadable. He was no longer the child the media had mocked for years. He was a young man with a presence. His father, seated beside him, frowned. "Your Honor, my son is here because he has an interest in the proceedings." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Interest? In law? That's interesting." Another round of chuckles followed. Barron finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Your Honor, I'm not just here as a spectator. I have studied law in depth. If the court allows, I would like to make an argument on behalf of my father." The laughter stopped. A ripple of surprise ran through the courtroom. Judge Reinhardt's smirk faded. "Excuse me? You want to argue in a federal court? Are you even legally qualified?" Barron's lips curled into a polite but confident smile. "Your Honor, the law allows individuals to represent themselves in court. While I may not hold a law degree, I have studied legal precedent and constitutional law extensively. I assure you, I am more prepared than you think." A murmur spread across the room. Some dismissed it as youthful arrogance, but others leaned in, intrigued. This wasn't the shy teenager the world had known. This was a young man daring to challenge a courtroom. Judge Reinhardt leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Fine," he said after a pause. "Let's see what you've got. But if you embarrass yourself, don't expect me to go easy on you." Barron nodded, stepping forward confidently. The room held its breath. The laughter was over. The courtroom, once filled with laughter, now sat in stunned silence as Barron Trump walked confidently toward the podium. Even the most seasoned legal analysts present weren't sure what to expect. Was this just youthful bravado, or was the young Trump about to deliver something extraordinary? Judge Reinhardt tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, Mr. Trump. You requested to speak. Let's hear your argument." Barron took a deep breath. His posture was upright, his hands steady. He had grown up watching his father navigate power, wealth, and controversy. But today, he wasn't just another Trump. He was standing as his own person. "Your Honor, esteemed members of the court, the prosecution claims that my father engaged in financial misconduct. However, the case against him is riddled with assumptions, political bias, and, most importantly, weak legal standing. Allow me to demonstrate." The confidence in his voice was undeniable. A few reporters leaned forward, scribbling frantically in their notepads. Barron turned to the opposing counsel, a well-known prosecutor named Elliot Green, a man feared in legal circles for his razor-sharp questioning. "Mr. Green, you have presented financial documents as evidence, claiming they prove fraudulent activity. However, these documents rely on ambiguous interpretations rather than clear violations of the law. Can you point to a single federal statute my father has definitively broken?" Green, taken aback by the direct question, cleared his throat. "The evidence." "Respectfully, sir," Barron interrupted. "I'm asking for the specific statute. I assume you know the law well enough to quote it." A few gasps were heard. The courtroom watched as Green hesitated, shifting through his papers. Judge Reinhardt raised an eyebrow. This wasn't the behavior of a nervous teenager. This was the strategy of someone who had studied legal debate. Barron continued, stepping closer to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the law is not about opinion. It is about statutes, legal definitions, and precedent. If the prosecution cannot directly point to a clear violation of law, then what are we doing here? Are we deciding cases based on narratives instead of facts? A murmur ran through the crowd. Even some members of the jury exchanged glances. Judge Reinhardt adjusted his glasses. He wasn't about to let a teenager outmaneuver his courtroom. Mr. Trump, he said, his voice calm but firm, that was a well-phrased argument, but questioning the prosecution doesn't prove your father's innocence. Do you have any legal precedent to back up your claims? Barron smiled slightly. This was the moment he had prepared for. Absolutely, Your Honor. Let me cite a case that directly relates to this matter. The room was hooked. No one was laughing now. Barron Trump turned a page in the legal notes he had brought with him, the rustling of paper the only sound in the courtroom. He scanned the room, making eye contact with members of the jury before addressing the judge once more. Your Honor, let me refer to the landmark case of McDonnell v. United States, 2016. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that political figures cannot be convicted of bribery or fraud unless there is concrete evidence of an explicit quid pro quo, an exchange of favors or money in return for specific government action. Simply put, vague allegations or assumptions about influence are not enough to establish criminal liability. Judge Reinhardt leaned forward, his interest piqued. Go on. Barron continued, his voice steady. Now, let's apply this precedent to my father's case. The prosecution argues that financial irregularities indicate misconduct. However, they have failed to prove that any supposed mismanagement directly led to an unlawful action. Just as in McDonnell's case, the law demands clear proof of intent and exchange, not just suspicion or speculation. A few people in the courtroom whispered amongst themselves. This wasn't just a decent argument, it was a strong legal defense. Even President Trump, who had been sitting with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, now looked at his son with newfound respect. Prosecutor Elliot Green, regaining his composure, smirked. That's an impressive citation, Mr. Trump, but you're comparing apples and oranges. McDonnell involved a bribery accusation. Your father's case concerns financial fraud. Barron didn't hesitate. Yes, but the principle remains the same. The law requires concrete proof of wrongdoing, not assumptions based on circumstantial evidence. In both cases, the prosecution must show that my father knowingly and intentionally committed a crime. So far, we have seen financial statements, but we have not seen evidence of an illegal act attached to them. Judge Reinhardt rubbed his chin. Interesting argument, young man, but financial fraud doesn't always require an explicit quid pro quo. Sometimes, intent can be inferred. Barron nodded, prepared for this counter. Absolutely, Your Honor. But if the court allows intent to be inferred without direct evidence, where do we draw the line? Are we comfortable convicting individuals based on interpretation rather than proven fact? The legal system is built on presumption of innocence. If my father is guilty, the prosecution must prove it beyond reasonable doubt, not rely on assumptions. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the prosecution team exchanged uneasy glances. Judge Reinhardt exhaled sharply and tapped his gavel. All right, I'll admit, Mr. Trump, you've exceeded my expectations. Let's take a recess. Court will resume in 30 minutes. As soon as the judge left the bench, chaos erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Legal analysts whispered among themselves. Donald Trump, who had remained quiet through the exchange, finally spoke as Barron returned to his seat. His voice was low, filled with both pride and curiosity. Where the hell did you learn all that, kid? Barron smirked. I've been paying attention. As the courtroom emptied for recess, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Reporters huddled together, legal experts exchanged hurried whispers, and even members of the jury seemed deep in thought. Barron Trump, still composed, sat beside his father, who studied him with a mixture of amusement and admiration. I gotta say, Barron, that was something. Even your old man never pulled off a move like that in court, Donald Trump said, a grin forming on his face. Barron shrugged. It's just the law, Dad. People forget that when emotions get involved. Across the room, Prosecutor Elliot Green was in a hushed conversation with his team. The young Trump had shaken them, and it was clear they needed to recalibrate their strategy. He's good, one of Green's associates muttered. We underestimated him. He's a kid, Green said dismissively, but there was a slight tension in his voice. We'll remind the court of that soon enough. Meanwhile, Judge Reinhardt remained in his chambers, replaying Barron's arguments in his mind. Smart kid, he murmured to himself. He had seen law students crumble under pressure, yet this teenager had not only kept his composure but had also backed up his claims with precedent. 30 minutes passed quickly, and soon, the courtroom was filled again. The judge took his seat, tapping his gavel once more. Court is now back in session. Mr. Green, do you wish to respond to Mr. Trump's argument? Green stood, buttoning his jacket. He gave Barron a small, calculated smile. Yes, Your Honor. While young Mr. Trump has impressed us with his knowledge of legal precedent, let's not forget that he is neither a lawyer nor a qualified legal expert. The courtroom is not a debate club. It is a place for trained professionals. I move to dismiss his participation in these proceedings on the grounds that he is unqualified to provide legal defense. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Some nodded in agreement. After all, Barron was not an attorney. Others, however, frowned, recognizing this as an attempt to silence an argument that had been too effective. Judge Reinhardt considered this for a moment, then turned to Barron. Mr. Trump, do you have a response? Without missing a beat, Barron stood up. Yes, Your Honor. While I may not hold a law degree, I am exercising my constitutional right to speech in a public courtroom. Furthermore, as per the Sixth Amendment, every individual has the right to self-representation. If my father wishes for me to assist in his defense, there is no legal basis to deny that. Gasps. A few reporters almost dropped their pens. Even Green blinked in surprise. Judge Reinhardt exhaled through his nose. Damn! He muttered under his breath before speaking aloud. Technically, the young man is correct. Mr. Green, while I agree that Mr. Trump is not an attorney, there is no rule barring his participation as long as he does not formally act as legal counsel. If his father wishes to allow it, I will not stop him. Donald Trump smirked. I say let the kid speak. Judge Reinhardt nodded. Very well. Mr. Trump, continue. Barron turned back to the jury, confidence in his posture. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are seeing here is a classic attempt to silence an argument, not because it lacks merit, but because it is inconvenient to the opposition. But the facts remain. The prosecution has yet to prove a single law my father has broken. And in this country, we do not convict people based on convenience. We convict them based on evidence. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Reinhardt tapped his gavel. Proceed. The tension in the courtroom was electric. No one had expected this. An 18-year-old standing his ground against a seasoned prosecutor, holding his own with logic and law. The atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a joke, with the judge mocking Barron Trump's presence, had now become a legal showdown that would be remembered for years. Prosecutor Elliot Green, now visibly frustrated, took a deep breath and turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not get distracted by theatrics. Yes, young Mr. Trump has presented an eloquent argument, but rhetoric does not replace reality. The evidence we have presented shows clear financial mismanagement by the defendant, President Trump. We cannot allow legal loopholes and technicalities to obscure the truth. Barron immediately responded, his voice steady. Mr. Green, if the evidence is so clear, why haven't you cited a single legal statute my father has broken? You've had all day to do so. Instead, you keep saying, financial mismanagement. A vague term that is not an actual crime. The law does not punish individuals for being careless with their money. It punishes fraud, bribery, and theft, none of which have been proven here. A murmur ran through the jury. Some of them were nodding, and even those who had seemed skeptical earlier now looked deep in thought. Judge Reinhardt sighed. adjusting his glasses. All right, I think we've heard enough. This court will now deliberate on whether the case should proceed or if the charges should be dismissed. The jury was sent out. The entire country waited in suspense. News channels across America broadcasted the scene, showing Barron Trump's poised and powerful defense. Social media was on fire, with people debating whether this young man had just outmaneuvered the legal system or whether he had genuinely exposed a weak case. After nearly 2 hours, the jury returned. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, stood and unfolded a piece of paper. Judge Reinhardt looked at her. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a decision?" She nodded. "We have, Your Honor. Based on the evidence or lack thereof, we unanimously recommend that the case against President Donald Trump be dismissed due to insufficient proof of criminal activity." The courtroom exploded. Gasps, murmurs, some cheers, some outbursts of anger. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" Donald Trump turned to Barron, clapping him on the back. "Kid, you just saved my ass, and maybe made history while doing it." Judge Reinhardt sighed, rubbing his forehead. He looked at Barron with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Mr. Trump, I laughed at you when you first walked in here, but I have to admit you surprised me. You didn't just know the law, you knew how to use it. I don't say this often, but maybe you have a future in this field." Barron simply smiled. "Maybe, Your Honor. We'll see." As he walked out of the courtroom, the cameras flashed, the reporters swarmed, and America buzzed with one question.